Hi. It's thank you. Thank you for giving me the privilege of speaking to you today. I have gone through my presentation at least 10,000 times today. So trying to come up with a minimum viable product of a presentation and listening to everyone today. And I was talking to Barbara and saying like, oh, they made that point, got to scratch that. Oh, they made that point, got to scratch that, So I'm going to talk to you, and unlike everyone else's slides, my slides are actually very talky. I've been on the road for a month presenting like crazy. And I'm going to talk to you about my life's work. And so a shout out to Gary's like, why am I here and why am I doing this? Well, it's really interesting. This country has been at war in some form or another for the last 20 years. And when we look at the consequence of that, it has been devastating, not only to our country, our treasure, lives. People's lives have been affected very deeply. People's lives overseas have been affected very deeply. And there is a growing consensus that this doesn't work anymore. And a friend of mine alerted me to this story in USA Today, and the quote was, "In this turbulent new century, the security of the United States will depend increasingly on how we engage, persuade, and inspire people in countries around the world." And this is from two military people. I received an email the day before yesterday asking me if I could go to speak at the NATO PSYOP conference for a second time. I spoke to NATO in 2011. And I said, and he just said, you guys were great when you were here in 2011. We want you to come out. Because why? They're finding that to have success in the environments that they're operating in, they need to know more about influencing groups and populations, and how to comply with peace agreements, how to change behavior, how to reduce conflict, than any projection of force. So within the military community, there is this realization that we can't shoot our way to peace. We have to come up with a different way. And it is really, really essential for us to do that. So how do we get there? And how did I get here? I mean, I almost thought I like feeling like one of those beauty queens with the tiara, and they say, well, what do you wish for the world? And I go, I wish for world peace. And in fact, it turns out that in recent years at Stanford, that's what we've been working on. And what's happened is this perfect storm of things that have occurred, especially in the last 5 years. We're in this era of mass interpersonal persuasion. A number of people have touched on how we can move people. I mean, we've all had experience. We've observed what happened in the Arab Spring, people using Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to communicate and to create these mass movements. We have a sense of this growing personal empowerment with the technology. And it is something tremendous. And so when we talk about peace, we need to talk about a new definition of peace. And when we think about peace, I once got into this unintentional argument over in a dinner party with a real estate agent who told me that world peace was impossible. And I said, I'm not looking to solve world peace. What I'm looking to do is make a dent in it. How can we make some measurable improvement somewhere? And in Silicon Valley, it would almost be about thinking of what your minimum viable product is for peace. But first of all, we have to redefine what peace is. And when we think about it, we think about negative peace, which is like there's war or there's absence of war. It's very binary. You get one or the other. But in this digital age where Mark Andreessen says that software is eating the world, software is eating conflict. Software is eating peace. It's just changing the face of everything that we know about statecraft, about nation building. So when we think about peace in the digital age, imagine engagement. Imagine all the bits of data that we're able to collect now that demonstrate how good we can be to each other. And that becomes an opportunity for entrepreneurs and innovators to begin to shape behavior at a mass scale. So I've touched on positive and negative peace. I'm going to show you something about peace data, because peace data is everywhere. We just haven't recognized it yet. But if we can measure it, we can begin to monitor it, we can begin to shape it, we can begin to make improvements on it. So for the first time in human history, we can actually measure interpersonal relationships. So You know, when you look at what people do, you know, in social science, see, they used to do surveys all the time, and they would ask people what they did. And of course, people lied because, you know, it's surveys. And we'd have these tiny sample sizes. And now you have a platform like Facebook, which is like social scientists' wet dream, because you have 1 billion people. And they did, 2 years ago, they did an experiment on Facebook, just changing the status line and priming people and saying, okay, for all the Americans that are on Facebook that day, for 10% of them, we're going to test to see if we prime them to ask them what they're grateful for, what will be the effect through their social graph if other people start posting gratitude status updates. And they could see the effect. But they were able to test it on 10 million Americans. And it was amazing. So this toolbox, this sandbox of social technology allows us to do this kind of A/B split testing about human behavior that we've never been able to do before. And so all of a sudden, this notion that people can't change, well, actually, they do all the time. And we can begin to design for that. And it's really, really powerful, and it's very exciting. So this is some data from the Vision of Humanity, and they do something called the Global Peace Index. Because their thesis is that if we have to start measuring conflict and peace, and once we can put a dollar cost to it, then it becomes a market, and then people start getting serious about resolving it. Right? Because peace is kind of like the environment, it's kind of like clean air. It's been an externality for forever. Why? Because back in the day when they invented accounting systems, we can only account for stuff we can measure. How do I measure clean air? Don't have a measurement for that, so I'm not going to account for it. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. It's just that we didn't have the ability to measure for it. Now, because we have sensors everywhere, we have cell phones everywhere, we have the internet everywhere, all of a sudden we're flooded with all this big data. And so all of a sudden we can actually measure the impact of what's going on. In 2009, my lab did a collaboration with Facebook. It was called peace.facebook. And what we did when we would talk to Facebook, we said is, you guys are actually creating world peace and you don't know it. Every time people across a conflict boundary make a friendship on a platform where their friends and family can see, that's a huge political statement. And so they started tracking that. And so you could look at friendship, daily friendships between Israelis and Palestinians, between Turks and Greeks, between Indians and Pakistanis, across religious boundaries, and in the United States across political boundaries. So you could see how many Republicans friended Democrats on any given day. Speaking of a conflict boundary. We did an analysis last fall during Operation Pillar of Defense, and this was in that week when there was all this bombing going on. Now, we keep track of this data, and like roughly, you know, about 20,000 Israelis and Palestinians friend each other every day. This is a cumulative number. It's like every day, 20,000 new Palestinian-Israeli friendships are made. That's something that you never hear about in the news, ever. What you do hear about is that there was a bombing or someone got killed. So over that week, there was 1,400 casualties. In the worst of it, 122 combatants died. Now, if we were going to chart that, this is what the friendship activity was during that week. And if I was to chart who was actually hurt, you would barely see it above the 0 line. When you begin to look at information like that, you go, there's actually a lot more good going on there than bad. And once we know that, it helps shift our attitude and our mindset about what is possible. And once you start looking at that, then, like any good Silicon Valley tech analyst, geek, analytics guy type would say, it's like, okay, well, there's something going on in my conversion funnel, and I got to fix that, right? So if I'm losing people on day 2, what do I need to do to change that? And then we start using all the techniques that we know in Silicon Valley in our toolbox around Web 2.0, about conversion funnels, about all this analytics, and then we start tweaking it, and then we start improving it. And when you do that step by step, bit by bit, you increase peace in that specific case. And that is really powerful. This is a chart of sexual violence and conflict. When we look about peace, what is the impact on women and children? Women disproportionately suffer from conflict. Probably the biggest unspoken battle today is the conflict between men and women. When you think about the domestic violence, when you think about rape as a tool of war, as a weapon of war, there is a global war going on between men and women. And when you look at the data, it's startling. So here you can see in red the countries where women are in extreme risk. The green, low risk. And there's a little corner of North Africa where they have no data at all. But it gives you a sense of what's going on. But if you were an innovator, then you would say, okay, now I have baseline data to work from. And now I can look to see how I can improve it. So I have to get back to the why. Why am I here? How did I get here? I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a venture capitalist, I've worked in innovation, and I've worked in the community. I'm Hispanic, Yaqui Indian. I grew up in a community that's dysfunctional, high rates of alcoholism, domestic abuse, and so on. And one of the things I realized as I was thinking of Judy's, what is my mess? Have I got a mess? It was trying to solve these problems. And it was one of those frustrations where you look at someone, you go, would you just get with the program? Would you please just do what you're supposed to do? Would you please take your meds? Would you please stop drinking? Would you please, and it turned out, and I didn't know this at the time when I was growing up, what it was these habits of being, these habits of thinking. And somehow through a cosmic accident, I'm not sure what it was, but the universe was pulling, and usually I go with the pull. I ended up at Stanford in 2009 in BJ Fogg's lab in persuasive technology. He's the father of persuasive technology. And I got the vocabulary and the tools to begin to solve these problems in a credible way. Because it wasn't just enough to say, I'm an entrepreneur and I have a brilliant idea. Because all of us have come up with brilliant ideas and then we try to execute them, and it's I feed the dog food to the dog and the dog's looking at me, but this isn't what I wanted to eat. And I go, but I cooked it up and it's tasty and it's yummy and and they don't want to eat it. And why don't they want to eat it? Because I didn't understand the fundamentals of human behavior and how I had to break things down so it would be simple for them to do. I couldn't rely on them being highly motivated, because an alcoholic is not highly motivated to change. Someone who's abusive is not highly motivated to change. People who chew their fingernails aren't highly motivated to change. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. We get in these ruts. So how do we move people to do the things, to be the better people that they want to be? It's related around simplicity. And if we can get it to be simple, then they can do it. And so this is if Einstein has, E equals mc squared, BJ Fogg has B equals mat, which is behavior is fundamentally broken down into motivation, ability, and trigger. And in this world, we think, the way we're going to get people to change is we're going to educate them. So we're going to create this great website, and it's going to have all the information they need, and then they're going to change. Or the way we're going to get people to do something is that we have to motivate them. Do you know how much energy it requires to motivate people? It's really hard. What he figured out was that you could get a lot of people to do something that they weren't intrinsically motivated to do if you made it bloody easy for them. Now, many of us may not be motivated to eat the entire bag of Doritos that's on the counter, but if someone opens it up and we smell it and we're chatting away, before you know it, we've consumed the whole bag. Why? Because it's really easy. Why? Because it triggers the scent. Why? Because we're mildly hungry or we're bored. And taking something as simple as that concept, we've been able to apply it to different problems in healthcare and compliance and so on. And it's turned out to be really brilliant, because once I understood that my job was to make it as easy as possible to help people do what they wanted to do, it changed my whole mindset in terms of how I design things. So, hello. So when we talk about how to design for change, we need to understand what the problem space is. And when you're talking about something as big as world peace or water scarcity or energy poverty or anything like that, you go, oh my God, the problem is so big, I don't know where to start. And yet in the examples this morning, what they did was they focused on a very narrow slice of the problem. Instead of saying, I'm going to take on energy in Uganda, and so what I need to do is come up with $1 gazillion dollars from the World Bank so I can electrify the whole country. Someone said, I'm going to start really small. I'm going to pick something really specific. Maybe all I need to do is have enough energy to light some light bulbs in a little hospital. And once I know that, I can pick a technology, and then I can go from there. The same thing with behavior. If I want people to do something, I need to get super, super specific about if I want to help women in a developing country, I need to pick the developing country, I need to pick the demographic. What is it? It's sanitation. Well, what about sanitation? Well, I need to teach them the value of washing their hands before they do X. Okay, I can do something around that. And that's very specific, and then it has impact. One of the things that we underestimate when we talk about impact is we think we need to do something really big and ambitious, and it's going to be so awe-inspiring. Why? Because we all have the smartest person in the room syndrome, right? So if you've gotten as far as all of you have in your careers, how'd you do it? You were like Hermione. You were the smartest girl in the room. You got the best grades. You know, the science project was elaborate. Everything was really complicated and impressive, and people go like, wow, you must be really smart. So we're looking for solutions that impress. And yet the solutions that we need in the world are not the impressive ones, but the impactful ones. They're small, they're modest, but they scale. Because if we can invent one solar panel in a suitcase, and it's so simple that anyone can do it, that means 10 million people can do it. And that has impact. So, in our lab, we work a lot with cell phones, and so I spend a lot of time, wearing Fitbits, and I did a Zio, and I got sleep performance anxiety because it told me how I really didn't sleep at night and things like that. It was very depressing. And there's a whole body, there's a whole lab that focuses on this stuff. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this in quantified self. But you're going, if we can do things like that to get people to turn off their lights, or to walk 10,000 steps, or to do any of these things, then surely we can develop applications where we're looking to see how good we can be to each other. From a positive peace space, can we be more attentive? Can we be more aware? Can we collaborate more? Can we cooperate more? Can we create more? Or in the negative space, which is to decrease conflict. How do we reduce it? How do we eliminate it? So I want to show you some examples of things that are being created out there in the world. I was at Facebook Compassion Research Day on Thursday. And I have to give kudos to Facebook because for the last 4 years, they've been working to understand how to add more emotional intelligence to their platform. Why? They want to reduce conflict. They want to reduce bullying on their platform. So they've been working with Yale, UC Berkeley, and Stanford to crack this nut. And so when we think about the evolution of social technology, and we're at that pre-Wright brothers stage, when you think about this, when our children and our grandchildren look back at this era, they're going to say, oh, it's going to be like when they were trying to figure out how planes flew, and so you see those old movies, and they have those prototypes of planes, and they flap their wings, and they just sort of jump around. And then, all these goofy designs as they were trying to get it right, and then finally the Wright brothers come along and they invent this glider, and then Charles Lindbergh, 20 years later, has a plane that's able to cross the Atlantic. We're still in that stumbling phase of figuring out what the problem is. But one of the things that Facebook has done is taken the language of nonviolent confrontation and saying, how do we embed that into an experience so that people can resolve their own problems? So if you have a dispute, if someone puts something on, on their status update that is offensive to you or disagreeable to you, they actually give you tools so that way you can communicate with people. Why? Because on the internet, we're all autistic. We don't have the facial cues. We can't read people's body language. We can't read the room. We don't have the cultural vibe of what's appropriate or not. And people think that the internet is ugly because people are ugly. Well, yeah, but the internet can be a very nice place if you design it to be a respectful place. So the problems that we have with the internet are design problems, and people are working that out. But more importantly, there are people who are innovating to reduce violence to make the world safer for women. Circle of Six is an application that was developed as an anti-rape app for women in India. And so it's using the power of social networks, so that way you can say, I feel like I'm at risk, and you can connect. There are apps to help women who are in a situation of domestic violence. There are apps that deal with human trafficking from both a corporate and a consumer standpoint. So the other way that we have impact is, there are huge markets for cruelty-free cosmetics. There are huge markets for organic. There are huge markets for, free-range chickens. Why? Because people have made a moral stance that they don't want to have violence against animals. Anti-trafficking, if we can get to that point and you can have a label or an easy way, so how do we make it easier for people to do the thing that we want them to do? If we make it easier for consumers to determine products that haven't used slave labor, chances are they're going to select that product. So we need to have the pull from the consumer as well as making it easier for manufacturers to comply. And that reduces violence because commerce and conflict are very interlinked in these countries. And finally, I want to end with citizen diplomacy. There's so much that we can do as individuals. In fact, there's a Wikipedia article on Facebook diplomacy. It's a term. And we're going to be working with Ronnie Edry and his wife Mikal and Juju, who started the Palestine Loves Israel page. And we're going to do a workshop with them at Stanford in the spring, where we're going to get designers and entrepreneurs from the Middle East to come together to develop peace apps. And because this is all about women, I want to introduce some of the women that I get to work with, who are also peace innovators. There's Professor Karen Gutierrez out of the Naval Postgraduate School. She's working with the Army Civil Affairs Group to develop new models for civil affairs, because we need to reinvent our military for a post-conflict world. We're not getting out of Afghanistan anytime soon, so the military that is there has the task of nation rebuilding. So what are the skills that we need, the type of people that we need, the models and frameworks in order to do that successfully. So we're collaborating with her. Annie Jantiz is from Paris Telecom Tech. Annie Reichart runs our Berlin lab, and Crystal Dem just launched our lab in Ghent. I wasn't very confessional, like a lot of the speakers, but I want to tell you how much this means, because if we can make a dent in this, all of us collectively, in terms of the choices that we make, we can, in fact, make a measurable improvement in peace in the world. Thank you very much.